one of the cool things about the Toltec culture is every 52 years, the entire culture would come together and they would review their entire reality. They'd review their political system, their farming practices, their medicine. Every aspect of their culture was reviewed. The things that were absolutely working were kept. Everything else was thrown out. They literally tore the tops off of all the temples, all the pyramids. Their pyramids were all step pyramids. They literally tore the whole top layer down, smoothed it out, made a floor, and then they created another layer. But it was based on a review of the culture, like a literal, and nothing was sacred. What was sacred was our life force. Our spirit is what was sacred. Okay? And the power that we hold through taking 100% responsibility for the choices that we make and the lives that we create. You see, there's nothing outside of us responsible for us. We're responsible for us. The messes that we make are our messes. Nobody's going to come along and save us from our messes. They're our messes. I've worked a lot with Native American people, and I've said several times to people over the years that I think probably the most toxic thing that the Europeans brought to the Native Americans was a victim-minded point of view. Because it's perpetuated. Again, it's a belief. It's a way of looking at the world when you believe life is personal. And then once that's set in motion and it's perpetuated, you can see how it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And it's passed on and on and on. And then when you mix that in with the mind's need to be right, and the mind's territorial nature of defending what it has determined as right and good at all costs, then you end up with the insanity where we humans kill each other over our belief systems, which is what we do. We've been doing it a long time. We say life is sacred, but then we're willing to go kill each other because we don't agree on a belief that's literally something we've made up. So we make our beliefs more important than life itself. They were an incredibly creative, imaginative, cool society, cool peoples. The sorcerer class, the wizards, got so, it sounds familiar, they got so hooked by the power that they held, their ability to manipulate reality, and they can. I've been with people that can part the clouds and change things and move stuff around. That's not a big deal. But they got so hooked by the power that they held, the ruling class did, and by their ability to manipulate reality, that it turned into this huge internal power structure, which led to the collapse of the culture. They became so self-absorbed in their way of doing things, which is kind of where our culture is at this point. Yeah. It's the same thing over and over and over again. But that's what happened, and they broke up, and they went different directions. There's a belief among a lot of archaeologists that the mound builders that came up the Mississippi were because there's a lot of similarity between the mound building cultures of the eastern part of the United States and what existed in Central America and Mexico. There's a difference between information and awareness. And when you learn to feel, or I feel things, and then the feelings will become understanding, and then I try and express what I'm understanding through language. That's really how I came to understand and see the way I see. It was not from someone giving me words. It was from living with. I have a home in Teo. That's what I call Teotihuacan. I have a home there in a compound, and I take groups of people. So it's literally information is transferred in light. Light holds information. Consciousness is light. And so in that transference of information, I live with the experience. I'm not interested in reading books. I was interested in reading the books, and then I realized that there's a whole lot more in the experience than there is in the book. So go live the experience. That's how I do it. The mind sees what the mind knows. The mind sees what it believes. It doesn't see what it's looking at. And so if what I'm saying is that basically the matrix of beliefs that you would call your reality, it becomes like a filter. And our interpretation of life is then subject to how we filter according to how we've been taught to see and believe. And that's culturally specific. It can be religiously oriented, it can be culturally oriented, it can be race oriented, who knows? All of those factors make up what leads to how we develop our own personal belief system. And we develop it from children up when we have no realization or idea that there's even a choice in the matter. When you're a little kid, you're taught what to believe. You're told the way it is. You don't have a choice in it. Well, as an adult, the fact that you didn't have a choice in it is not an excuse for continuing to perpetuate beliefs that really don't make sense. So people say, well, I'm all American. I'm for the military no matter what happens. That's a completely, from my perspective, that is typically a completely irresponsible perspective, because you're not personally taking any responsibility for the level of what is actually being perpetrated in your name, right. And so if we're going to take responsibility for our personal reality 100%, then we have to learn how to see what's going on, realize that I'm going to have a definite interpretation based on my beliefs and my faith and all of that, but also try and hold a place of being able to see it from another point of view, because there's infinite points of view on any situation. Life's not black and white. The human mind wants to be black and white because the human mind needs to be right. There's not much worse in the human mind than being wrong. When it's wrong, it goes into overload. It freaks out. I have a daughter who met the Nechung Oracle, Kutenla, who is the Oracle of Tibet, in San Francisco, and she walked up at 4 years old and pulled on his robe and said, "You remember me?" And they know each other. I mean, there's a whole backstory to that now, but they clearly know each other. She knew him from the last time an aspect of her consciousness knows him. Now, whether it's reincarnation, I don't know, but I do know that she knows him and he knows her, and she knows His Holiness. She knows all of them. Well, when we all sat down and talked about it, and they said, well, would you please bring her to Dharamsala so she can see His Holiness and meet everyone again? I said, you know what? This was when she was 6 and he came back to the States. I said, she's 6 years old. Her name's Isabella. She's here to do what she's doing now. And yeah, we'll bring her to India, but I want her to know who she is and what she's doing here right now first, because she remembers all that. But the point is this lifetime and right here, right now. When we get all off into all this stuff that has no relevance or bearing on anything in the moment, and this world needs us present now. And that's what the Toltec perspective was. You can wake up in the middle of a completely insane situation, and you may not have answers for that insane situation, but you need to stop perpetuating the insanity. So it's literally first things first, in the recovery world saying. So the first thing you need to do when you find yourself in a completely insane situation is stop contributing to the insanity. Then once you've addressed that situation, that reality in that moment, then somewhere down the road, you'll have opportunities to figure out, well, what do I do next? But the way we've been taught is that if you don't have an answer, don't even point at the problem. And that's the response that you get a lot. Well, I don't know what the answers might be because I'm so enmeshed in the problem that what exists beyond the problem, I'm blind to. So if I try and come up with an answer to a situation from being in the midst of the problem, it's just going to be another aspect of the same way of thinking that created the problem in the first place. You can come back to, I don't like all this cliche spiritual talk stuff very much, but you could say, what would love do here? Okay, well, if we intervene on our stories with, well, what would love do here? What would an impersonal, unconditionally loving presence, if you want to call it God, how would that respond to this? Because we're responsible for how enmeshed we've become in the story and how we live the story and allow the story to be our excuse for the continuation of the perpetuation of the insanity. The insanity is not really in the story. The insanity is in the behavior of the humans, and the stories justify that behavior.